welcome back to our channel. I'm Jade and this is Dee.
Hi.
And today it is part 3 of the video. And today we're going to be talking about the arrests and confessions and trial and so much more. So stay tuned and enjoy.
Before we start, big sorry to everybody out there. I fell sick for the last couple of weeks and I was actually dying. I had no voice, bronchitis, and I actually thought we had the videos to end Fish's saga done, but unfortunately my computer deleted them. So
she wants to put me through so much torture,
just like Fish.
Yeah.
So sorry about that, guys, but we'll get on to it. December 13 in 1934. It took 6 years before Fish was actually apprehended and put on trial for the kidnap and the murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd. Once arrested, Fish showed no remorse and was not fazed by his arrest. He did not even attempt to deny the murder of Grace Budd, but he nonchalantly added that he involuntarily ejaculated twice while strangling her.
It's a bit disturbing and all, do you know what I mean?
Albert Fish's confession was heard by many of the law enforcers, and I have to say a lot of them didn't believe what he was saying because, again, his looks, he was
Like the grandpa type and all, do you know what I mean? His little overalls, grey beard, little gentleman, look down the road
Granddaddy.
and all, you know?
He was a real granddaddy,
Yeah,
and
pop,
they
pop.
just didn't want to believe what he was actually telling them. Detective King conducted the first official confession. Now, Fish has gone on to say that when King left the investigating room, a group of other men came in and they beat him, they threw him around the room and they gave him a good hiding, and they told him that if he did not confess to the crimes that he was being charged with, that they were going to beat the life out of him just like he did to his victims.
He would have loved it.
Would have brought him too much pleasure.
Yeah.
Detective King conducted the first confession, and Fish stated in this confession that he was bloodthirsty when he read the ad that Edward had placed in the employment ad. He had intended to take Edward to a remote area where he would then cut off his penis and let him bleed out. But once seeing Edward and his friend, he decided that it wasn't going to work because they were very powerful looking and he was afraid that they would overpower him. But as soon as he seen Grace when she walked in, his mind had completely changed and he had wanted Grace instead. When he took Grace away, he stopped at the newsstand where he had hidden his tools. Now, this is where he had his, what was it, butcher's knife, a cleaver, and his saw.
Yeah.
It wasn't even really like a saw. It's one of those little wooden saws that you use
There's
for
actually a
carpentry.
specific name for that.
When they arrived in Wisteria Cottage, which was located in the midst of a wooded area, Grace began to play and pick flowers. Fish then went on to the second floor, removed his clothes so not to get any blood on them, and opened the package to reveal his tools. Once ready, he called Grace to come up, and as he hid in a wardrobe waiting for her, he then proceeded to jump out at her. She screamed at his naked body as he grabbed her by the throat and choked her to death.
He was actually sexually aroused by this, and which is just disturbing in all grounds. He then popped Grace's head on a bucket and decapitated her, dropping most of the blood in the bucket, which he would later throw out in the yard. And he undressed Grace. He began cutting up her body using the cleaver and the butcher's knife. He took some of the body parts, wrapped them in newspaper.
Just like a butcher would.
Yeah. Do you reckon he could have been a butcher in, like, when he was in his young years?
Well, he had a good few amount of jobs, but the one most mainly, as he said, was the painter, because he was a travelling painter. But we don't know what he did when he was in Brussels.
I reckon he was probably a butcher at some point.
Well, his idol was the butcher from Germany.
I don't know. It's just a weird one. But he would return later then to dispose the rest of her remains. He got rid of his tools too at this time. After the confession, King asked him why he did this act, and he replied he could not account for it. He was then asked why he wrote the letters he did, which he claimed that he had a mania for writing.
I'm also a culprit for that. Forever writing letters. If you ask any of my friends, they'll say they call me pens. The reason being is because I'm always writing something. And
You're
my
leashing
letters are
a
essay
serial
loans.
killer, like, you know what I mean? But on that same day, officers headed to Wisteria Cottage to recover Grace's remains. God rest her soul. Fish stood nearby watching the scene unfold. More than 50 fingers, legs and other bones were found near the house.
So it wasn't just Grace's bones that were found there.
That's where they end up finding more of the victims. So if it wasn't for Grace Budd, these other victims wouldn't have been found or identified.
No, the bones that were found there, they weren't the victims of the ones that we've already mentioned. These are unknown victims.
Yeah, I know, but they wouldn't have found these things.
Yeah, true. It was because of Grace Budd that
They found all
everything
these
came
things.
out in the open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was the Grace of light. Unfortunately, she was killed, but because of her, all these other things came to light. But as he continued to watch and all, he seemed devoid of any emotions, so he just had like a resting bitch face. Later, he claimed he felt sorrow after the act and that he would have offered his life to recover Grace's. Oh, so nice of you. You already took her life away.
Now he wants to give it back.
Yeah.
Or give his life
Give
for
his
hers.
life for hers. But also at this time, he said nothing to suggest cannibalism, as it was clearly shown in the letter to the Budds. And Grace's case opened the door to many other cases that were unsolved ones. That night, the capture of Albert Fish had leaked into the newspapers, and reporters descended on the Budd apartment with the news. So as soon as it was released, it was spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
Shortly afterwards, Detective King, the one man that never gave up, drove Mr. Budd and his son to Edwards to the police station to identify the man himself, Fish.
Edward did more than identify Fish. He threw himself at the old man. "You old bastard, dirty son of a bitch." Mr. Budd was surprised at Fish's lack of emotion. "Don't you know me?" he asked the old man. "Yes," Fish answered politely. "You're Mr. Budd. And you're the man who came to my home as a guest and took my little girl away," he said in tears. As Fish continued on with his confession, he would talk about his first granddaughter, and his face would light up at the mere mention of her name. And he will quote that she is 12 years of age and in 7A. Now, we looked up 7A, and as we're not familiar with American schools and grades, 7A comes across to us as like its extracurricular activity class, which could be along the lines of drama, dancing, music. But Jade looked up 7A and came up with a bunch of drumsticks, so...
Just because it came as a bunch of drumsticks.
But his granddaughter was a great little dancer, and he stated that she was going to take up the stage dancing. "I loved children and was always soft-hearted. Murder is not in my heart at all. It never was."
But you just go and murder people for the crack, okay?
He sounds like he idolised her, but he speaks about her in the same breath as he talks about murder. Not in his heart. Two words you don't put in the same sentence, children and murder, unless you're Fish, of course. And he is an exception to the law, so we find. Fish's face was then released to the papers, as we had said earlier on, and people started to come forward to say that they had seen or heard of him, and a motorman identified Fish as the man he's seen carrying a young boy on a trolley crying for his mother on February the 11th of 1927. That was Billy Gaffney. And he was crying out for his mother. You think somebody would have stopped him at that stage and said, "Listen, is the child okay? Like, why is he crying for his mammy?" But no. This statement confirms that Fish was connected to the kidnapping of Billy Gaffney. Fish confessed things about this kidnapping. He wrote a letter to his attorney stating the following.
If you don't want to hear the details of this letter, fast forward onto the timestamp shown on screen. See you on the other side.
"I brought him to Riker Avenue Dumps. There is a house that stands alone, not far from where I took him. I took the G-boy there, stripped him naked and tied his hands and feet, gagged him with a piece of dirty rag I picked out of the dump. Then I burnt his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. Walked home from there." Next day about 2 p.m. I took tools. A good heavy cat of 9 tails. Homemade. Short handle. Cut one of my belts in half. Slit the halves in 6 strips, about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below his belly button. Then through his leg, about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knees. Then I put the sacks, weighed with stones, tied the ends and threw them in the pools of slimy water you see all along the road going to North Beach. Water 3 to 4 foot deep. They sank at once. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best, his monkey and peewees, and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper. It was good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkey and peewees and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when meat was roasted about a quarter of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon, so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet fat little behind did. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peewees I could not chew. Threw them in the toilet.
Like, wow, a cannibal's recipe manual. Like, this is where I throw my hands up and say, what the fuck? I'm speechless. In my opinion, the electric chair was not worthy of what he done. Like, what he done to them children, you think it can't get any worse. Like, you can drop a comment in the box and let me know your thoughts on if you're speechless as I am. Do you know what I mean? Like, personally, I genuinely don't think the electric chair was worthy of him.
Too easy a kill.
Too easy. Too easy of a kill. Way too easy. And he probably fucking enjoyed when he was dying as well.
Well, when he was on the chair, didn't he say something that's one of his famous quotes to today? Was it, I want to see what the thrill of a electric chair is, or something along those lines. I'm sure we'll find out later as we continue the case. But as the trial got closer, people did start to make their reports, as we said, about seeing fish. And a lot of them actually didn't make it as a report to be followed up. They just gave the information that they had seen him, that they had heard of him, that they had seen him with this particular child or that particular child. But the thing about it is, the police wanted reports so that they could catch him for the deaths of other children that were involved in the case. But I think people were so afraid of him. Like, remember, he is the thing of nightmares, like they said. He's the Boogey Man. He's the werewolf of Wisteria.
The Brooklyn vampire.
The Brooklyn vampire. So people were pretty afraid of this man. Even though he was a granddad, people were terrified. So I reckon to protect their own children from the same fate as his victims had gone through, none of them had made that crucial report that was needed. They just identified him and left it at that. The young girl also identified fish that was what's her name?
Mary O'Connor?
No, she's died. What's her name? Beatrice Beale. She also came forward with her father and had said that Fish was the man that tried to take her off to collect some rhubarb, and her father identified him as the man that he had chased away and the same man that he had chased away from his shed that very same night. And it was all before Francis MacDonald was slain. Fish was left with one single chance at this stage, and that was a psychiatrist declaring him insane. Mary Nicholas was Fish's 17-year-old stepdaughter, who described Fish showing her and her siblings a game which included hints of molestation and child attack. Now, in saying that does not mean that he molested those children or his children. He actually had them molest him instead. The way this was done was he had this little game. He would go into the bedroom, come back out with a paddle, as the son will go on to say, is about 2 foot long, with nail studs in it.
Cat of nine tails.
No, he never brought the cat of nine tails out with the children. He only used that on himself when he went back into the bedroom. But he would come out in a pair of boxers or underwear, as probably some of you might call them, but a pair of brown underwear. She remembers the colour of them. And what he would do then was he would let each of the children sit on his back, and the game was they were to raise their hands and pick any number with their fingers, whatever the number might be, and he was to guess that number. And if he didn't guess the number right, for each finger that they held up, they then got to use the paddle and smack him as hard as they possibly could for the amount of fingers that they had placed up. Now, I can't imagine how that game really went down, because the thoughts in my head is when they were hitting him with that paddle, the nails, and the children, I don't think we're having a great time, but imagine just trying to pull the thing back out of him with all the nails. So just, that thought is just stuck in my head. It's just them hitting him with that paddle. I'm surprised none of them are traumatized or are in the same seat he's sitting in. Jerry, because that's the excuse he's using, that what he's saying happened when he was small. But yet he's there doing it to his own grandchildren. Not grandchildren.
His own children.
He's there doing it to his own children. But what was strange was no one did make the official report.
Attempting to support an insanity plea, Fish wrote to Detective King describing the worst of his self-tortures. He wrote, "I shoved 5 needles into my belly, legs and hip. At times I suffered awful pains. An x-ray will show them. They're in there now. I put them under my spine. I took out only 1 needle. I couldn't get the others. I did put one in my scrotum too, but I couldn't stand the pain. If only pain were not so painful. Voices told me to purge myself of sin by self-torture. That's what induced me to put them in. When I can't stick them in myself, I like to torture other people with them."
This trial began on March the 11th, 1935 in White Plains, New York, the Big Apple City and all, do you know what I mean? With Frederick P. Close as judge. And the Chief Assistant District Attorney, Albert F. Gallagher, as the prosecuting attorney. James Dempsey was Fish's defense attorney. And although no one doubted his insanity, well, clearly because he is insane. So although no one doubted his insanity, Fish was deemed mentally fit to stand trial. The night before, he had managed to extract a chicken bone from the soup he had been served the night before in the prison. And he actually sharpened to a point where he could proceed to repeatedly stab himself with it. So with the chicken bone, like, he literally scraped it along the ground and all, like, sharpening it and all. So that's how he done. But when the guard heard him moaning and he rushed in, he managed to take a makeshift weapon, which is what's called in the prison, and take it away from him. It was reported as a suicide attempt, but it was simply a means of satisfying his deranged sexual urges. Also, we reckon, like, with the suicide attempt, it was kind of like them to see them that he was actually not mentally fit to stand trial, that he'd actually got the insanity plea, but the people saw straight through him and were like, yeah, don't think so. So throughout the 10-day trial, Fish maintained an indifferent attitude. He sat slumped in the chair, often with his eyes closed, and appeared to show absolutely no interest in what was going on. Rested bitch face. One reporter described him as resembling a corpse, insecurely propped in a chair. Just get a bit of powder on the nose, you know what I mean? Keep your makeup handy.
The defence readily admitted that Fish committed the crime It was their contention, however, that he was legally insane at the time of committing the killings and that he remained that way as he is in front of them. The prosecution, on the other hand, set out to prove the opposite, that he was sane, knew the wrongness of what he was doing, and therefore must answer for his actions.
The prosecution called a series of psychiatrists as witnesses, each of whom stated that the defendant was sane, though suffering from a whole host of psychotic conditions. In the end, the prosecution did persuade the jury that Fish was sane, after being said he's legally insane. They found him guilty of murder in 1st degree. The sentence was execution in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. One of the jurors later revealed that most of the jurors felt that Fish was insane, but they felt more strongly that he was deserving of the electric chair. So, Gertrude DeMarco, Fish's 31-year-old daughter, said her father once confessed that he stuck needles into his body. Fish's oldest son, of 35, recalled the time he was living with his father had found 2 full homemade paddles studded with blood-soaked nails, which is what they were saying earlier on about the paddle with the nails, the 2 foot long. But a weird one, Fish never struck or spoke harshly to any of his kids. He always spoke in a kind manner.
And not only that, when his daughter actually gave out to his granddaughter, he actually told her not to be talking to the child that way, that he wouldn't even chastise them. But he can go out and do these such horrific crimes.
To little other kids as young as 4, like Billy Gaffney.
It's believed that Fish had between 3 and 9 victims in total. He selected victims he felt no one would miss. They mainly included mentally handicapped and African American children whom he tortured and with his implements from hell. By this point, Fish was a fully blown psychotic, believing that Christ demanded he torture and mutilate his victims with meat cleavers and handsaws. To further demonstrate Fish's strange behaviour and insanity, Dempsey called to the stand a woman who received several obscene letters from Albert Fish. Now remember, these letters that we had read out in video 1, this is Mrs. Shaw.
Part 2.
Part 2 was Billy Gaffney's letter, and then Grace Budd's letter.
Oh.
This was Mrs. Shaw that he called to the stand. And remember I said that the letter we had read out in part 1 was only a small portion of a numerous amount of letters put together just to make up a small letter, just to give you a taste of exactly what he was actually writing to this woman. But we have read the letters that he wrote to this woman, and
It's vile.
He's a vile man. He would actually talk about himself in a 3rd and a 4th person, and he pretended he was all these other people and interjected all these people into his story, into his fantasy, but all the while he was talking about himself.
Yeah.
What he wanted her to do to him, and what he would love to do to her in return if she
Did what he said.
did or was happy enough to do what he said. Now, out of respect to the women that were in the courtroom on the day these letters were being read out, Dempsey had asked that all women be cleared from the room because he himself thought that the letters were obscene and didn't want to
Didn't want to insult.
Probably insult, but I was trying to think of a stronger word. But he didn't want to have the women feel shamed while they were sitting there because...
I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, apart from the obvious characteristics, sick minds, twisted desires, a compulsion to kill again and again, it's hard to generalise about serial killers. It's usually said that most serial killers are white. That's certainly true in the United States, where the majority of the population is Caucasian, but it's nearly not the same case in South Africa, which has a startlingly high number of serial killers, and almost all of them are black. Even in the US, there have been plenty of African American serial killers. Many escaped Albert's grasp, but others did not. And on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65, he was convicted and executed by electric chair. It took 2 jolts of electricity to kill Fish.
So after the execution, many believe it was because of 27 needles buried deep inside his pelvis, which were found by X-ray during his arrest. But an autopsy that was performed on Fish. Dear sir, please be advised that an autopsy was performed on the body of Albert H. Fish, number 90272, who was electrocuted in the accordance with the law on the above date. All vital organs were found to be normal in normal condition except for diverticulosis of the colon. Your very truly yours, Charles C. Sweet, MD, Chief Prison Physician. So, at a meeting with reporters after the execution, Fish's lawyer James Dempsey revealed that he was in possession of his client's final statement. This amounted to several pages of handwritten notes that Fish apparently penned in the hours just prior to his death. When pressed by the assembled journalists to reveal the document's contents, Dempsey refused and stating, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the filthiest string of obscenities that I have ever read." And still to this day, no one has seen them.
Not
ever.
even in the book is this particular ending of the letters that Fish wrote. But if you do get the book and you do get to read the book, you'll see that everything else that's written in the book is all written in Fish's own handwriting,
It's very hard to read.
except for why he did it. So they are pretty strong letters, so be advised if you're going to read the book. It is pretty strong. It's a good book. It gives you an insight to the man's mind and get a feel for the sense of exactly what he was up to, at the same time disgusted, appalled, sick. I think you could find a million words in the dictionary at this stage of exactly how you'd feel about what he'd done to those children. Fish wasn't displaying characteristics of a psychosis. He was called a psychopath personality without a psychosis, but was calm and composed. A psychiatrist involved with the case said there was no known perversion that he did not practice and practice frequently. Fish actually bragged that he had children in every state, at least 100, and they're not 100% sure if this actually meant that he had fathered the children or that he had murdered and molested or ate them. Then again, half the things that Fish will go on to say wasn't always the truth. He did tell a few porcupines. Albert Fish was never very emotive or remorseful about his murders, but he did go on to tell an author that he had no particular desire to live and that he had no particular desire to kill. It is a matter of indifference to me.
So if he's now...
I do not think I am altogether right. So he's claiming himself that he wasn't altogether in the head. Like, if he can sit there and quote that to an author, well then I believe deeply that he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
Definitely knew
100%.
what he was doing. But he was also smart enough to know what fame was like, because he kept on telling Dempsey to get onto the reporters, give them this, tell them that, give them your name, they'll make a movie out of it. Like, who would we get to play me? Who would we get to play you? So he was, in a way,
looking for the fame, looking to be known.
yeah, and I think that's probably what it concluded to in the end. When the author asked him if he thought he was insane, Fish said, "Not exactly. I never could understand myself."
But having reportedly victimised hundreds of children in the early 1900s, I wasn't even born then. Albert Fish's apparent paraphilia crimes have been the subject of research for the better part of a century. Presently, much conjecture exists to whether Fish's crimes were the result of a familial mental illness nature or environmental abuses suffered as a child. Nurture, so nature versus nurture. So, however, it is possible that the etiology of Fish's atrocities stem from both biological and environmental factors outlined in this piece. As Dr. Wedham said, quote, "There is no known perversion that he did not practice and practice frequently. He shows 18 17 perversions. Now I'm going to read out these words. They are difficult and weird.
And I'll put them here so you can look up the meaning if you need to, but I'm sure most of you at this stage will know what the majority of the words mean. And just because you do know what they do mean, or you actually practice them yourself, it doesn't mean you're insane. So we're not saying you're insane if you practice these or if you know what these mean, because there's a lot of high class people out there, or to say people in high society out there, that actually practice frequently most of these perversions. 1.
Sadism.
2.
Masochism.
3.
Flagellation.
4.
Castration.
5.
Self-castration.
6.
Exhibitionism.
7.
Voyeurism.
8.
Pedophilia.
9.
Penicillinito.
10.
Fellatio.
11.
Cunnilingus.
12.
Analingus.
13.
Coprofagia.
14.
Undinism.
15.
Pecure.
16.
Fetishism.
17.
Hypertism.
18.
And cannibalism.
As I said, I'll let you look up what the words mean, but I'm sure a lot of you know what they mean out there. So with this, we're going to come to the conclusion of Fish's saga. And theories of why people commit serial murders have been advanced. Some theorists believe the reasons are biological, as we said, suggesting that serial killers are born, not made, and that their violent behaviour is a result of abnormal brain behaviour. Given the multitude of negative biological and environmental factors noted in Fish's life, there is no single determined factor that has adequately explained how he became an infamous paedophilic individual. While Fish's early childhood experience of torture, ridicule, head trauma likely influenced the development of some of his behaviours, they cannot fully account for his crimes.
So likewise, the familial history of serious mental illnesses cannot solely account for the extent of his heinous behaviours. Perhaps the answer to the question of what made the known Albert Fish commit such crimes lies in the interaction between biological and environmental factors, nature versus nurture. Advancements in research might provide an answer to this question and ultimately lead into interventions preventing such apparent behaviours. Regardless to the etiology of his behaviour, Fish remains one of the most deviant serial child killers in American history, who holds the record of the most documented number of paraphilias, which is the crazy ass 18 words I just read out a minute ago. For all his weirdness and laundry list of fetishes, this sane man, which was actually technically insane, was fully capable of keeping up correspondence with his biological children during his incarceration, and was alert enough to hide his face through many attempts for those who were witnesses to identify him. He was also cunning and cruel, enough to choose children since they were small enough to overcome, and the smaller the better. And that's because he chose them with mental impairments of certain race, because in his own words, like so many who are killers, they were less likely to be missed, which I think is dead, like, bang about wrong. And then the exact words of Dahmer and many others, like, he knew exactly right from wrong, and he did not care, didn't give a rat's. The rules did not apply to him or his desires.
It may have taken Detective King 6 years to find out where Fish was and who Fish was. But this was down to the fact that he was actually looking for a Mr. Howard and couldn't find where he went, what he'd done, and only because he had wrote the letter to the Budd's family could King trace it back to Fish. In 1920 there was no FBI, no crime labs, no database to link crimes up to find offenders or understanding of sexual predators. When a child went missing, all they could do at that stage was find out who the last person was, staying with them, and criminal profiling didn't start until 1978. And you'll see that in some of the other cases that we're going to be getting into, like with Edward Kemper or Jeffrey Dahmer.
When Dr. Weirden went on to say Fish is known for 5 child murders, a judge said he was implicated in 15 murders. when Dr. Weirden gave a number of at least 100 children had been molested and possibly as many as 15 murdered, the judge said that's most likely on the low side.
And that's because of the extra bones that were found where Grace's blood was actually deposited as well. Fish is the oldest man ever known to have been executed in the electric chair at the age of 65.
65.
And he'd been going for, since he was 20?
So 45 years of sexual pleasure and torture and all the likes of it from when he was 7 from the orphanage. So he's a sick old man.
Right, that brings us to the end of Fish's saga, and we hope you enjoyed it just as much as we actually enjoyed trying to record it. And again, I do apologise for the late upload of this video, but that was
She got sick.
I actually got sick, and then when I went to upload,
She lost all the footage.
Turns out I actually deleted the footage, so we had to re-record. And then another time our camera wasn't working, so it's like this upload, it wasn't meant to happen at that time, but it's ready to upload now, and we hope that we will see you in one of our next videos. As far as I know, our next video is
Jeffrey Dahmer.
And then we will then work into our Halloween special, which will
we will keep a secret on you, so you can stay tuned, and like we'll give you a few little hint.
But it's supposed to be a good one. So, without further ado,
Bye.